Good afternoon. Welcome to our August SugarCRM User Group. I am your host, the Director of Marketing here at Technology Advisors, Taneen. And our two presenters today are our resident sugar experts, Megan Sheehan, our sugar trainer and business analyst, and Justin Kuhlthau, our sugar practice manager. Today we're going to be talking about interesting use cases for advanced workflow. So I know Justin and Megan have discussed the benefits of advanced workflow before, but now they're going to show you some really cool ways to use it that maybe you didn't know about before. One thing I'll point out before we get started, the platform that you're on, some of you may not be familiar with, so I just want to quickly acquaint you. If you click around any of the boxes there, you can resize them, move them around within that console. You can control the volume with that little volume media dial. If you have questions at any point throughout this presentation, simply enter them into that Q&A box and we will get them answered for you. And in addition, I encourage you to check out those little widgets on the bottom of the screen. You'll see bios of Megan and Justin, ways to contact them if you need anything after the user group today. And in addition, you will also find a link to the registration for our next user group, which I will discuss in a little bit more detail at the end of the presentation. So with that said, I'd like to turn the floor over to Megan and Justin.
All right, great. Thanks, Taneen. As Taneen said, today we're going to be talking about advanced workflows. We're going to walk through a few examples of applications that we've seen customers use with advanced workflow. And of course, as always, we'll be talking about new releases that Sugar has put out and upcoming events.
All right, thank you, Megan. Sugar Advanced Workflows, like it says, enable administrators to streamline common business processes. They do things like monitor your data for new leads, new contacts, any new record, or updated records that fit a specific criteria. And they allow you to perform actions when you meet that criteria. So for example, you could have a phone call that gets completed or a meeting that gets completed. And at that point, you want to update the parent contact or lead to set the last contacted date for that person. So you're taking that action of when the lead or call is completed, you're updating the parent record. You could also do things like create new records. So for example, if you have a meeting and you complete it and you have a checkbox that says automatically generate follow-up activity, and that checkbox is checked when the meeting is completed, you could have it create a follow-up activity 7 days in the future at the same time or something like that. These advanced workflows were introduced in Sugar 7.6, so everyone should be on a version that has advanced workflows. It is for Enterprise and Ultimate editions only. Professional editions do not have access to advanced workflows. And I will also note that Process Author is the same thing as advanced workflows. You may see both definitions within Sugar as well as the documentation. And one final note, there is something called Legacy Workflows. It's the old workflow engine that will be going away soon, but does have some uses as we'll see in this.
All right, we want to spend most of our time today really diving into some examples of advanced workflow, so we're not going to spend much time here at the beginning on some of the basics. We have had a previous user group about advanced workflow, and that link will be included in the follow-up email, and I'm guessing it's also down in the resources in the bottom of your screen. So you can check that out at any point if you are looking for more of the basics, if this is a brand new tool to you. I do want to just quickly recap, though, the structure of advanced workflow. Advanced workflow is actually 4 separate modules inside of Sugar, 3 of which only administrator users have access to. You can see those 3 listed at the top of this diagram here, the Process Business Rules, Process Email Templates, and Process Definitions modules. We'll be spending most of our time in the Process Definitions module today. That's where you actually lay out the steps of your workflow and define exactly what your workflow process needs to do. But Process Business Rules and Process Email Templates can feed into your workflow processes, and we will see examples using both of those today. The running processes themselves, when something is running through an advanced workflow process, can have interaction with your users through certain types of activities. I don't think we have any examples of those today, but that is something that users can interact with, so that's why that module is down at the bottom of the screen in the white background, because regular users can interact with processes where appropriate. With that, let's go ahead and dive into our first example, Justin.
All right, thank you. So our first example is kind of what I just mentioned, updating that last contact date field. We want to be able to easily identify on, filter, and report on the last time a contact or lead, essentially a person within Sugar, was contacted. So this would match up with the last time a phone call, meeting, task, or email was logged against that person. So what we're going to have to do today, obviously we're going to need that custom date field on the contact and lead modules to track that last contacted date. And we're going to update that with advanced workflows. So the design for our workflow is going to be, it's going to start when a call, meeting, or task is completed or an email is created. And then we want to perform an action of updating the parent contact or lead last contacted date field. Pre-work I've already done. I created the last contacted date field. So let's go ahead and share my screen and take a look at that. Okay, everyone should be seeing SugarCRM now. You can see here I'm looking at the contact Justin Kielthau. I have a last contacted date field just below that with August 21st. And then down below in the subpanels, you'll see I have a meeting here. Test workflow with multiple contacts is held. And it's a start date of August 21st, or yesterday. So when I created this, it automatically updated that field. If I jump over to process definitions, you can see here I have a process definition called update lead last follow-up date on meeting completion. Now I'm going to create a couple of new advanced workflows and one legacy workflow today to show you how all of this works. The first one we're going to create is the simplest, create a new task. When a task is completed, we want to update that field. So first I want to show that screen here. If I come back into my contact and click the little plus sign on my task subpanel, you'll notice you create your tasks with a name, and then they're related to the account, TechADV, and the contact, Justin Kielthau. So we need to traverse this person here and update the field when the task is completed. And we want to track when it's completed based on the completed status. All right. I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new process definition in here. I'm going to give it a name, update parent last contact date on task completion. Our target module is that task module, since that's what we want to monitor for changes. I'm going to leave it disabled. We don't want to enable it until we're done editing it, so I will click Save and Design. And again, we dove into what all of these different icons up here mean in our last meeting, so if you need a refresher on that, view that previous recording. But I want to start with a start event, so I just drag this onto the page here. I'm going to name it New Completed Task Created. Then I right-click on it and go to Settings. Come down here. You can see I have Module Tasks is already selected. This is going to apply to new records only. And my criteria is, again, I'm going to click the Evaluations button down here, Module Field Evaluation. Find my field status is equal to completed. I'm going to click Add, and that adds it to the criteria. You can add really complex criteria up here with the ands, ors, nots, and the parentheses, but we're just doing something simple today. And I can save that. And that's all well and good, but that is only going to accommodate when a new task is created and it's completed. More often than not, tasks are inserted into Sugar with a due date in the future as a reminder, and then down the line you would complete it. And that's considered an update, not new. So I need to drag down here another start event that would say task updated to completed. And I can type anything I want in here, even having typos in there. It's not going to affect the advanced workflow. Again, I'm going to right-click and go to Settings, find My Applies To, and here I want to monitor updated records only and the first update, not all updates. It mentions see the help text here, and that's kind of important. You just kind of hover over this and it'll tell you the difference between those. I only want this workflow to fire the first time the task is completed. If someone for some reason is editing a task 6 times, I don't want it to fire all 6 times after it's been completed. My criteria then is the same. Evaluations, module field evaluations, find my status field is equal to completed. Add that, and then I can save it. Now I need to come up here and find my action because we're going to do an update. So I'm going to update parent lead. Right click on this. My action type is going to be to change a field. I right click again, then I can go to settings. And I'm looking for that. Well, first I have to select the module, and you can see here it starts on the tasks module, and these are all of the modules that are related. In my case, I know I want this leads module. And then I can come down and find my last contact date, click the checkbox, click in the field, and I can choose, I'm just going to, for now, just put the runtime in there. So whenever this runs, it will, whenever the task is completed, it will update that date. I can come down here. Now this, I should note, only updates the parent lead. I can actually add another action here to update the parent contact. So a task at any given time can only be related to one lead or one contact. So that's why I need 2 actions to traverse both of those relationships. And I can then come down and just do contacts. And come down, find my last contact date, runtime, save that. And then I have to actually add an order to these guys so that they will actually run. And then I can drag this one to here. And then, of course, I always need an end sequence, which is here. And now I have no more element errors. I can click the Save button, exit this, edit here, enabled, and save that. So now I have this enabled process definition. If I come back to my person here, Justin Kieltau, and I add a new task, let's do test advanced workflow. Status is completed, and save that. It should update this to 822, which it did. Okay. Now, I also mentioned we wanted to do this for calls and emails. Doing it for emails is the same, but doing it for calls is a little bit different. If I come in here and click Log Calls on a contact, you'll notice it's putting that person or multiple people down here in the Guests section. I can add as many contacts as I want in here. and you unfortunately cannot traverse this many-to-many relationship with an advanced workflow. So to traverse that relationship, we'd actually have to come into our legacy workflow engine to get across that many-to-many. Now I know we're supposed to be talking about advanced workflows, but you really can't talk about advanced workflows without talking about legacy workflows, simply because sometimes there's things you can't do. So let's go ahead and just very quickly create a new workflow definition to update parent contact when call held is the right term. We'll do calls here. We want new and updated record. That's all fine. Click Save. And then we want our status to be when a field in the target module, we want our condition to be when the status changes to a specific value. And then I can specify that value here is going to be held. And what action do we want to take place? Well, we don't want to send any alerts, but we do want to actually update the field in a related module. So I have to click this hyperlink here, and we're going to go to Contacts, save that, click Next. And then we find that last contacted date. We can do it 0 hours from the triggered date, just like the other one. Save. And now this should work. So if I come in over here, let's find a new lead. Insert my call. Test legacy workflow is held. And now our last contacted date is 8/22. And you'd have to do the same thing, same exact thing to traverse that same lead relationship when leads are in the guest area as well. Okay, let me stop sharing here, and I will turn it over to Megan.
All right, so the next example we're going to look at is going to allow us to send email reminders for a periodic task that needs to be completed. So the use case here was one of our customers had a process where they have to send materials out to their customers, and sometimes they have to do it once a year, sometimes twice a year, sometimes 4 times a year. It varies based on customer. And so they needed a place to track how often they were sending those updates to everyone, when the last time they were sent, and then of course the natural next step was to do a reminder of when it was time to send the next reminder or the next materials. So what we did in this scenario is we added a series of fields. First of all, they weren't sending these updates to everybody, so there's a checkbox to indicate who's actually receiving these periodic updates. And then if that's checked, there's a couple of dependent fields that pop up. First, a drop-down field to mark the frequency, annually, biannually, or quarterly. And then a date field to track the last time that an update was sent. As we were working on building out this process, in terms of some design thoughts, obviously this process can start when that box first gets checked. That might be a new account that's just being input into Sugar, or it might be an existing account where someone's going to start receiving the updates. So just like Justin's workflow had 2 start events, this one will need 2 start events as well. This one also needs a way to automatically exit out of the workflow process if someone no longer needs to receive these updates. So if that box gets unchecked, we're going to need a mechanism in our workflow process to immediately stop the process and not make any future reminders to send them updates. We'll need to figure out when to send the next reminder, and then we'll have to wait for that date, that time, before we send an email reminder that it's time to send the next update. I'm also going to emphasize in both of my examples today thinking about exceptions to the workflow process. This is something that, as I've built out more workflows and more complex workflows, becomes really important in terms of making sure you've covered all your cases. So what's going to happen with this workflow process if someone checks the box but they don't put in a frequency, or they don't put in a date to start from as to when the last update date was sent? Now, if those fields are required, hopefully that wouldn't happen. But something to make sure you're thinking about, either by making those fields required and or by allowing for that within your workflow process. This workflow process is going to have to happen repeatedly. So first of all, someone might just go in and update that last sent date independent of when an email reminder has been set, because maybe they decide to do it early for whatever reason. And second of all, once an update is sent, we need to go back and start over, because we're going to have to send another update in the next quarter or the next year, whatever that time period was. And then something else to think about, I'll talk more about this at the end, what should happen after we send the reminder? Do we need to follow up to see if they actually did anything with it? Do we just assume that we sent the reminder and we're good to go? How do we want to handle that in our workflow process? So in order to build this process in a timely fashion during this demo, I have done a little bit of pre-work for us. Besides coming up with that process design, I've also created a hidden field that's going to track the next reminder date. When does that next update need to get sent? And I've also created a process email template that I'll use for my email reminders. I'll take a quick look at that when I pull up my screen here, but I did most of that work already, or all of that work already. I just want to take a quick second to show you that. So here I am in the process email templates module inside of Sugar, and I've got a number of different email templates set up here, but the one that we'll use in this workflow is this periodic update reminder. So if I go ahead and design that really quickly, you can see the email builder for the workflows is hopefully what you'd expect. It allows you to set the subject and the body of the email that you're going to send, and it gives you a mechanism for inserting variables where you want to insert data from Sugar into that message body or subject by clicking the gear button here. That'll bring down a list of all of the fields that you can add. You just pick the fields you want to insert. You can also insert a link to the Sugar record using this Sugar link icon there. That's pretty straightforward. We're going to jump over to the process definitions module and go ahead and create our workflow process here. So I'll give this a name. My target module here will be accounts, so nothing for me to update there. And as Justin said, we always want to build this in disabled status and then go ahead and enable it once it's done. Okay, so again, just like Justin's process here, I'm going to need two start events, one for new account and one for updates to existing accounts. Each of these is going to have the start condition. So new records, we'll look at that checkbox field, which is called send periodic updates in the accounts module. Send periodic updates equal to true. And it looks like for some reason this is getting caught off on the bottom of my screen here, so that's going to make life interesting. There we go, add. And then we'll do the same thing in the other one, except for this is going to apply to all records only. I'm going to do the all updates option here because I'm going to use the changes to option, which is only available under all updates. So same field, send periodic updates. I will do changes to true this time. And again, see if I can maneuver this so I can click that add button. Okay. All right. The next thing that I am going to do in my workflow processes is I'm actually going to provide the mechanism for that early exit condition. So I need my workflow process to constantly be watching to find out if that box gets unchecked. Now I'm going to have my workflow process doing multiple things at once. It's going to go through the rest of the steps in order to send the reminder emails, but it's also going to do this waiting. So I'm going to use a parallel gateway for that. Parallel gateway is going to allow me to specify multiple next steps and do all of them. So for my early exit condition, I need to use a receive message event or action here. That's going to allow me to tell the workflow to wait for something to happen. In this case, what I'm going to wait for is for that box to be unchecked. And I'll configure that wait message event, or receive message event, I should say, to say exactly that. If the send periodic update changes to unchecked, then we're going to go ahead and just terminate our process. The terminate process versus the do nothing, the difference here is do nothing means other branches would keep running. That's not what we want to happen here. We actually want the process to terminate and stop running at that point. So I changed that to a terminate process end event there. Okay, so we've taken care of our early exit condition. Now we can worry about the actual meat of our process here. Like I said, what we're going to have to do here is first figure out when we need to send that next reminder email. That is going to vary based off of that frequency. How often are we sending them? So what I'm going to have to do is have a gateway to check the frequency so that I can figure out how much time to add to the last update date or the last send date before I send the next update. So here I'm going to need 3 different options coming off of this gateway because there's 3 possible time periods here. And I'm going to use the update action here to set the date to 1 year later, 6 months later, or 3 months later. Now these actions will all look remarkably similar other than the fact that we're doing that different time period. So in all 3 of these actions, we're going to be updating that hidden field called next update date. And we're going to set that to the last update set date plus the relevant time span, in this case 1 year. In this case, oops, there it is, 6 months. And in the last case, 3 months. That was something funky there. What did I click on? And so each of these actions, whoops, it looks like I missed the plus button there. Each of these actions are updating the same field. They're just setting that date slightly differently based off that time period. So I'll connect each of those to my gateway here. And I think it's time for me to give up on making this look pretty. And then I need to set up that gateway to tell when to take each branch. So the 1 year later will be if that update frequency is equal to annually. 6 months later will be, of course, if it's equal to biannually. I may have to adjust my zoom here and see if that helps with my save button issue there. There we go. And then the last one will be that quarterly frequency. Still, really? The screen share, I think, is messing with my screen size there. There we go. Okay. All right. Since I'm only going to do one of these three things before I move on to the next step, best practice from Sugar is to have a converging gateway after that to bring those steps back together and figure out what happens next. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a quick converging gateway to bring those three actions back together. Strictly speaking, in my experience, this isn't necessarily necessary, but I have seen a few workflows have issues if you skip it, so I've tried to go ahead and follow Sugar's recommendation there and start using them. And after that, I'm actually going to split things off again. So from here, once again, there's two things I'm going to ask the workflow process to do, so I'm going to need another parallel gateway. This time, one of the branches will do the email reminder, and the other one, again, is going to do some monitoring for me because I want to be aware of any updates to that last set date. So let's go ahead and do the email reminder piece first. I think that's the kind of simpler conceptually piece, even though it's actually more steps here in the workflow process. If I need to send that email reminder, I've figured out when to send it. I've set a date field inside of Sugar to when I want to send it. Now I'm going to go ahead and do a wait condition to wait until that date. Now I could also have done 3 different wait conditions here. The reason I did do that because I want to do that monitoring for that date change as well. It just made more sense to do it this way for me. So we're going to wait for the next update date. And once that hits, we're going to send our email reminder. We'll pick our email template and then who we want to send that to. In this case, we'll just send it to the account assigned user. And then we need to wait to see if the date gets changed. So we'll go ahead and put another receive message in here. And go ahead and monitor for the last update set date to be changed. Now I also want to monitor for that date to be changed, again, before the email reminder gets sent. So I'm going to have that other parallel branch that just looks at that date changed. And this is going to look exactly the same as that other one. It's just waiting to see if that date gets changed. I'm going to have another converging gateway here to bring those two branches back together. And then this is where I'm going to loop back to the beginning of my process. Once it gets here, the date has changed. We're ready to figure out again when to send the next reminder. So I'm going to loop all the way back to checking the frequency and figuring out when to send the next reminder. Save that process. And I'm going to go ahead and jump back to my slides here.
We just had a question come in. So I know you can create new records in process definitions, but can you reassign currently existing records to relate fields? So a use case would be when lead equals converted, relate all calls currently related to the lead to the account instead, so calls aren't forgotten about if in the lead once it's converted to an account and contact.
There is actually an administrator configuration setting that would allow you to move the calls to the converted contact instead of leave them under the lead. I don't think that's something that Advanced Workflow could currently do. Advanced Workflow has some pretty significant limitations still around working with relationships and related records. So only certain relationships can be accessed through Advanced Workflow. We actually saw an example of that with Justin's example with the call guest relationship. So that is something that Sugar is continuing to work on and to allow for more relationships. It's actually in their roadmap for the next couple of releases, but Currently, I think your best bet towards that use case would be to explore the configuration setting, which is under System Settings. All right, so to wrap up, a couple of final comments on this periodic updates workflow example. First of all, Justin's workflow was really simple to test. All he had to do was create a task to test that workflow example. So we went ahead and he did that for you to show you that process. This one obviously is going to be a little bit more work to test, and it's going to be made much more complicated by the fact that I've got some really long wait periods in my workflow process. To really fully test this workflow process, I'd have to wait a year to see if it worked. Well, that's not very useful to me when I'm trying to test something. So one of the things that I will do when I'm testing a workflow process like this is I'll use much shorter wait periods while I'm testing, initially at least, and then I'll go back and change them to the correct wait periods before deploying the workflow. One other thing that I would think about while testing this workflow process is I'm using a hidden field in this workflow to do that next send date. While I'm testing, I would probably show that field on the screen so that I could make sure that was getting set correctly, especially if something isn't working right with my workflow when I test it. I'd want to be able to track, did that date get set appropriately? Is that where the issue's happening, or is there something else wrong with my workflow process? And then, this workflow process was designed this way in part because of the specifications of the customer I was building it for. Obviously, we could have used tasks inside of Sugar for the reminders here instead of sending an email. The nice thing about tasks is maybe that would then allow me to see when the task was closed to know that it was done. The update frequency in their example was 3 different time periods, annually, biannually, or quarterly, but you could have had something like an integer field for a number of days or number of months instead of a drop-down field, or you could have more options on that drop-down field. In this example, next update date was a hidden field, but it doesn't have to be hidden. It's something that you could actually show on the screen. It might be useful for reports, for filters. So just because, this example hid that field doesn't mean it would have to be hidden. Phew, okay. We've got one more example here, and I'm going to move through this one a little bit quicker. I may not dive into all of the details on this one just because I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and we do have a couple of other things to talk about at the end here. But I do want to talk about this example because it introduces process business rules and uses those in a workflow process. So in this example, we are working on assigning cases or support tickets to people, and we're also worrying about how long it should take to resolve those tickets. And both of those things will actually vary based off of some categories in our cases module. So depending on the product that is being worked on and maybe a type in some examples, we're going to assign those cases to different people, and they're also going to have different SLAs associated with them. Some of them have to be resolved more quickly than others. Most of our cases are going to be assigned based off of the product, but some products are sub-segmented below that based off the type before we're assigning them. And so here's a table just kind of showing you how we're looking to assign our tickets in this example, our cases. So for product A, B, and C, it's pretty simple. All of the tickets go to one person per product. So product A, for example, goes to Chris Oliver and has a 2-day period. Product B goes to Will Weston and has a 3-day period. We're also potentially needing to alert different people if that SLA period is exceeded. So again, based off of product or other factors, we're going to email different people with an alert saying that we've exceeded the SLA on this particular case. Now, if we look at product D, it got a little bit more complicated. For product D, we also have to look at the type of case. And again, based off of the case type, we're going to have different assignments, different wait periods, and so on. So we are going to leverage process business rules in this example to simplify managing a process that has so many different conditions and so many different resultant things that we need to do based off of those conditions. We'll want to terminate this process if the case gets resolved. So just like our last workflow process had an early exit condition, same thing here. We don't need to send an SLA exceeded notification if the case is resolved. And we'll also need to have a gateway that has different wait periods once we know how long to wait before we send that SLA exceeded notification. And in this example, you saw those email addresses listed on that previous screen as well. This customer needed to send, actually I don't know if that's actually true, but in my example anyways, the people I'm sending my SLA notifications to are not necessarily users associated to that case, or maybe they're not even Sugar users, period. And so I needed a way to track the email addresses in the case itself when the case was not actually linked to those users. And so I'm going to use a text field inside of the cases module to store those email addresses and then turn around and send to that text field as the recipient. And again, I made a note here at the bottom of the screen. You always want to make sure you're dealing with those exceptions to the rule. What happens if the product and type are not assigned to a specific value that we're expecting? What if a new case product gets added and no one comes in and updates the workflow? What do we want to have happen in that scenario? Is there a default value that we want to assign? Do we want to send an email to somebody? There's lots of options for how to deal with it, but we need to make sure we've thought about how we want to handle that. So besides coming up with my design here, I have created that text field for tracking email address. I've created some email templates as well. One for sending an email if the SLA period gets exceeded, and the other for notifying people if something does go wrong, if I can't find who to assign a case to, for example, to have an email that goes to somebody to say, hey, something went wrong here, you need to go look at this case and assign it, so it doesn't just float out there forever untouched. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the process business rules module this time. I'm going to go ahead and create a new business rule, and I'm actually going to only partially build this out for you because you're going to see in a second, building a business rule takes a lot of clicking. So I've built the whole thing out, but I want to show you how I did that and start from scratch first. My process business rule essentially has two sections to it. It's got conditions, things I want to check. It's got conclusions, things I want to do. So my conditions here are going to look at the cases product field. And in some cases, we also need to check that case type field. So I'm going to add that into my conditions area as well. And then once I've done that, I can go ahead and I can just click into each of these areas. So I can say the product equals A, for example. In that case, I don't have to check the type, so I'm going to just leave those blank. And I'm going to start looking at what I want to return for my workflow. So in my workflow, there's a couple of different things that I need to do. First of all, I need to know so that my business process can wait the appropriate time period, how long it's going to have to wait. And so I'm going to go ahead and return that value to my workflow process. Product A looks like it was 2 days, so I'm going to go ahead and just pass back the value of 2 to my workflow. So this return value column is going to be referenceable in your workflow process, in your process definition, after you run this business rule. You'll be able to say, okay, if that answer was 2, do this. If the answer was 3, do that instead. Besides returning things to my workflow process, I can also update fields for my business rule. And this is where using a business rule for something with multiple conditions and multiple returned steps like this is really useful. So I can go ahead and I can set the assigned user for these cases to Chris right from my business rule. And I can also set that email recipient to megan@ex.com, and that's going to push that value into that text field for me. So I would just repeat this process for each of my products. Again, this is where I said it starts to get lots of clicking, because then I would come back over here, put in my return value of 3 days, assign these cases to Will, and send the email to same recipient, megan@ex.com. Let's go ahead and let's do one where we're going to also look at that case type. So let's just skip ahead and pretend I was looking at product D. For product D, I'm going to also fill in type equals, it looks like installation is my first one. And that's going to have a 2-day wait period. And assigned to Max, and email to Justin at ex.com. And then I would repeat that with my other subtypes or types by filling the rest of the details out for the next type. So I'm going to go ahead and exit that. Oh, it's going to yell at me because I didn't finish filling this one out. Let's just get rid of it. I'll show you what the completed one looks like just really quickly so you can see that. Here it is with all of those conditions. So I've got A, B, and C, and then D for each of the 3 types with the number of days to wait, the assigned user, and the email recipient. So if I jump over to my process definition module, I can now create my process definition on the cases module. We're going to start this when a new case gets created. In this case, we're going to start it for every single new case. So all I'm going to put in here is to do this on new updates. I'm going to or new records only. I'm going to leave my criteria box completely blank because I want to do this for every single new case that comes into my system. Once that case comes in, I'm going to have Sugar run that business rule. So that's also done through an action. Instead of picking change field or add related record, I'm going to pick business rule here. And then I just have to tell Sugar which business rule I want to use. And business rules are pretty much always followed by a gateway to do something based off of those returned values. I'm going to check the result. And remember, it's returning to me the number of days that I have to wait. So I am going to follow this up with some wait periods. Wait 1 day. Wait 2 days. And, I included the wrong icon there. And wait 3 days. I'm also watching the clock and realizing I probably need to wrap up this example. So what I'm going to do is just do one of these for you. Do wait 1 day. Instead of making you watch me do the same thing 3 times, we're going to pretend there's 3 of these here. We're going to pretend that one was set up correctly. Oh, it's not even going to like me because I picked the wrong thing there. Okay. So we're just going to have 3 of these guys. And again, we go in to configure that settings, tell it what to do based off of, instead of a module field evaluation, a business rules evaluation. So if the business rule returns 1, we're going to go to the wait 1 day. And then the same thing if we wait 2 days, wait 3 days for the other 2 actions, or the other 2 criteria. We're going to want to converge these guys together again, these different branches. And this is also where I would add in that exception element to my process. If my business rule doesn't return 1, 2, or 3, then something is wrong. It did not get the results that I was expecting because every single thing in my business rule was supposed to return 1, 2, or 3. So if I do want to have that exception monitoring, this is where I'd send my exception email. And what I would do is I would make that my default action. If none of my conditions are true, it doesn't equal 1, it doesn't equal 2, it doesn't equal 3, then I want to go to the send exception email branch and send an exception email with my appropriate email template to the appropriate person. In this case, I'm going to do my admin, which I think her name is Jen. There we go. And then if my wait period gets reached, I want to go ahead and send, oops, wrong icon again, send my message to whoever I'm sending my exception alert to. In this case, it's that text field. So it's going to be a recipient in the cases module where I'm going to pick that SLA notification email field and then pick the right template. Connect all this together, and then of course, I would also have potentially put that parallel gateway in at the beginning again to do that monitoring to make sure when my case gets resolved, it goes ahead and exits this process. It stops waiting to see if the SLA is going to be exceeded. This, again, is going to be one that's going to be a bit more work to test. To really test something like this thoroughly, you really want to test each possible flow, so each product, each type, different combinations thereof to make sure that the case gets routed appropriately. You're also going to want to, again, potentially shorten those wait periods. You don't want to have to wait 1, 2, or 3 days while you're testing this workflow process to see what happens. And a couple of other things about design here. You might want to show an SLA due date in a field rather than having it just be a wait period. That way the users could prioritize which cases to work on based off the SLAs. You might want to have a default wait period in that exception branch so that if there is no SLA that's determined, you still have a reminder email that gets sent eventually saying, hey, this case still is open. All right, and with that, I think we are going to wrap up advanced workflow examples, and Justin's going to talk a little bit about some new releases.
Thank you, Megan. The first new release we have on our slides today is Sugar 8.1.0. This was released in July and is for the cloud only. It's another thing I should mention. It's no longer called Sugar On Demand. They're calling it Sugar Cloud. So if we're referring to the cloud, we're referring to what used to be on demand. Within 8.1.0, there's some pretty cool new functionality. Specifically for reporting, you can now schedule reports for other users as well as yourself. This was a common request we got a lot. You had admins who were good at building reports, and then they wanted to schedule them for their users or management, and now they can do that. Sugar's also added a whole lot of new out-of-the-box reports to help people get started with what's possible. With regards to advanced workflow, which we were just looking at, there's some improvements to importing and exporting, as well as gateway and start event improvements. So some new things you can do with gateways and start events. And those enhancements to advanced workflows, they're always trying to reach a parity point with those legacy workflows we looked at briefly, so that they can finally get rid of those legacy workflows. Data privacy, you can now generate a link for email opt-in for a specific contact. And now doing the GDPR erasing of personal data also erases the values from the activity stream. That was something they were lacking before. And a few other things. I like the ability to display notifications from Sugar on the login screen. And then, of course, I always like performance improvements as well as defect fixes. Sugar 8.0.1 is a new release that's on-premise only. If you recall, Sugar switched to a quarter release model where on demand in the cloud, they have 4 releases a year. And then on-premise, they only have 1 major release each year. Sugar 8.0.1 is not one of their major releases. It was simply bug fixes as well as that ability to erase personal information from the activity stream.
There have also been a few mobile releases. In May, Mobile 6.1.2 came out with support for the GDPR data privacy features. And in July, Mobile 6.2.0 came out. This included the ability to now create and modify quotes and quoted line items from the mobile app. So you can now generate and update quotes from your phone or tablet through the Sugar mobile app. That is only available if you're using Sugar 8.0 or higher. If you're using an earlier version of Sugar still, you can still use Mobile 6.2. It just won't have the quote editing features. And of course, there were corresponding releases for Sugar's mobile development kit to match those releases. There have also been a couple of Outlook plugin releases. So 2.5.0 back in May included support, again, for the GDPR data privacy features. 2.6.0, which came out in July, has a bunch of new features in it. So if you're not using the latest version of the Outlook plugin, I would definitely recommend checking that out. It is going to have some of these features, I think, only for actually, I'm going to take that back. I don't think it does. Forget I said that. The big thing here is, first of all, they reorganized the settings. So rather than having the email-related settings kind of scattered all over that primary tab when you first go into the plugin settings. They've moved them all to a mail tab, so it's easier to find them. And here's the big one. There's now an option within that new tab to automatically archive all emails that you send and receive as long as a corresponding contact or lead is in Sugar. So if the plugin can find a matching email address in Sugar, it will automatically archive your email into Sugar for you. You still, of course, have the option to leave that turned off, to manually archive the emails if you want to have more control over which ones do and don't go into Sugar. But this, again, is something people have been requesting for a long time, to have emails automatically flow into Sugar, and that is now an option with the latest version of the plugin. There are lots of other smaller features in here, some new options for handling company name, supporting for that erase data feature, options for syncing Outlook categories as tags, abilities to set record teams when archiving emails, and relating emails or other new records to multiple existing records instead of just one. But again, the big one here is really that automatic archiving of emails feature. Okay, there are also a couple of releases for the IBM Notes plugin for those who use IBM Notes instead of Outlook. Again, back in May, there was a feature that had a release that had GDPR support. And then in August, version 2.3.0 has some new features in it, not matching to the Outlook plugin features. It's a completely different set of new features available for the IBM Notes plugin, but also focused around ease of use. So streamlining what you're focusing on and what options you're seeing when you're using that plugin instead of kind of having everything available at all times, even when it didn't make sense. Options for instant syncing of notes when you're syncing a document. Options for whether to delete things from Sugar when you stop syncing them. And the ability to sync things even if they're not linked to a record in Sugar. And then a few of Sugar's plugins, Hint, Marketo, and Customer Journey, had some releases just to provide support for the latest version of Sugar 8.1. So no new features in any of them. However, there are some updated versions. If you're on 8.1, you should probably double check to make sure you're running the supported version of those plugins with 8.1.
All right, Sugar 7.9 is approaching its end of life. I doubt Sugar has any cloud customers still on 7.9, but I know there are still some Sugar customers that are on-premise on 7.9 and even earlier versions, so you should be working on upgrading those so you can get the security fixes that Sugar releases.
Justin, did we lose you?
No, I'm here. Is this my slide too?
Are you going to talk about SugarCon?
Sure. SugarCon is in Las Vegas this year. It's a Wednesday, October 10th and Thursday, October 11th. There is pre-registration available on Tuesday from 3 to 5 p.m. I'll also be in Vegas all day on Tuesday. If anyone wants to meet up, reach out and we can hang out on Tuesday before SugarCon starts.
And of course, we do have our regularly scheduled training classes available on our website if you're looking for some more in-depth training on Sugar. You can always check those out on our website under training.
Last, we have some news that SugarCRM has partnered with XLKKR, which is an investment company, and they've invested a lot of money into SugarCRM via this partnership. And this is really good for Sugar. They now have essentially lots of money they can invest in improving the product and making their services better.
All right, so again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, our next user group is going to be in October. We've had several customers recently asking a lot of questions about Act-On, marketing automation, and how to best use their Act-On system, especially when it comes to its uses with Sugar. So we're going to have an Act-On expert here with us in October going over some major talking points about Act-On and taking your questions about the best ways to utilize Act-On with your sugar. So if you're currently an Act-On and sugar customer, definitely recommend joining us for that. In addition, we will, as always, be sending out a follow-up email to this presentation with the recording and some highlight clips for you. That's, of course, pending that it actually recorded for me because I'm the producer and I'm having some technical difficulties, but it looks like it recorded on Megan's screen, so fingers crossed, people. We will hopefully have a recording for you. If not, we will figure something out, I promise. Thank you all for joining us today, and thanks again to Megan and Justin for an awesome presentation. Everybody have a wonderful afternoon.